we have Ms. Zoe Dabbs with us. She is the Insider Threat Analyst at Insider Threat Management Group, ITMG. Ms. Zoe Dabbs have a professional research background in national security, politics, and foreign affairs with a regional concentration in Eastern Europe, Russia, and Central Asia. In her current role, she supports the insider threat management for a Fortune 5 company. She identifies the intelligence gaps and processes for improvement in the threat model. She received her master's degree in politics and security from University College London School of Slavonic and Eastern European Studies. Being a cyber threat analyst, Ms. Dabbs will talk about mitigating insider threat and implementing cyber security policy. Welcome, Ms. Zoe. The forum is yours now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sadiq. And I just wanted to thank all the panelists for having me here with you as well. I want to acknowledge that I'm breathing rarefied air. So thank you very much. I actually have a deck for you guys today. Let me just share. It keeps me on track when I want to go off on tangents. My dad calls it the gift of the gab, and my grandmother calls it talking too much. So here we go. Right, so based on my background, where I'm coming from, I'm going to discuss mitigating insider threat through cybersecurity policy and not just practices. When Daniel Ellsberg copied and exfiltrated the Pentagon Papers in 1969, he just used a photocopier and brought the pages out in boxes. And Americans' understanding of that at the time was more based in treason and espionage. The concept of insider threat wasn't really part of the public lexicon. But when Edward Snowden stole classified information from the NSA, he brought it out on a thumb drive the size of your finger. So it's no coincidence that our concept of insider threat has evolved dramatically in the past few decades. That's coincided with the rapid evolution of the cyber landscape. Because insider threat is such a relatively new concept for corporations and governments, it has only recently been acknowledged for what it is holistically. It's not just the threat of nefarious activity from disgruntled or fortune-seeking employees. It also includes the threat, as Ms. Mushtaq said, of clicking a random link that you shouldn't, or not being trained to understand when someone is trying to elicit sensitive information for you. So in regards to that, we dubbed that unintentional insider threat, or UIT, which the acts of careless employees pose the greatest insider risk to an organization or company. A Carnegie Mellon CERT study showed that 40% of the participants surveyed, their greatest fear for their organization was that a careless employee would do something to compromise their network. And in fact, 50% of data breaches are due to UIT, unintentional insider threat. In order to mitigate the risk of insider threat, it's necessary to understand the difference between malicious and unintentional. And with that knowledge, it's possible to target the major gaps in an institution's or government cyber program. Committed with malintent, malicious insider threat is pretty self-explanatory, and it's the most dramatic, and for lack of a better word, the sexiest version of insider threat, but it should be the least concerning for governments in terms of protecting their infrastructures from their own employees. Unintentional threat occurs when a current or former employee who has had or has authorized access to an organization's network, system, or data, who through action or inaction without malicious intent causes harm or substantially increases the probability of serious harm in the future. The majority of security compromise due to insider threat is UIT, and they're short for should be elevated in the consideration of securing cyber networks during the policymaking process. So UIT can be broken down into 4 separate categories. You have DISC, which is an accidental disclosure over the internet of sensitive information. You have UIT hack, which is when a malicious outsider is accidentally granted access through malicious code, social engineering, or an unauthorized device. You have Fizz, which is simply when people dispose of physical documents incorrectly, and Port, which is when security is compromised due to loss of device product. So disk and hack insider threats can be addressed primarily through improved organizational cyber training and implementation of cautionary monitoring and data tools. FIS and Port, usually we address those through improved protocols and bolstered organizational policy. So the causes of UIT, there are dozens if you want to break them out really small, but they fall under three main umbrellas, which is human error, organizational practices, and a weak cyber infrastructure. Each cause has a clear and distinct mitigation strategy that works in tandem with the others in order to reduce the overall risk of UIT. So human error, it's mostly about training. Mitigating human error requires enhanced awareness training for all employees who routinely use devices and access networks. This should include reviewing phishing scams and social media threat vectors, as well as how to handle data properly and what is sensitive data, because a lot of employees don't tend to have that level of awareness. The next is organizational practices should be revised to include a hands-on aspect to train employees how to properly use security tools. So activate VPNs, update the patches on their computers, etc. This training should be initiated by management and executed from the top down, and leadership should dictate best practices, company culture of data handling protocols, device security, and workflow. In addition to ensure employees are functioning at their highest levels, management should also streamline workflows and adjust deadlines to mitigate human error caused by fatigue, excessive workload, minimal time off. And finally, in order to provide a safety net, so to speak, for human error that will inevitably occur, even with training and modified organizational practices, we need to make sure that organizational cyber infrastructure is enhanced. So that should include defense tools such as software that recognizes phishing emails, prevents data loss, monitors potential data loss, and detects malicious websites. Organizations need to make sure that they invest in the security of their firewalls, their antivirus software, their anti-malware, in addition to enabling remote wipe access for all devices. So in order to properly mitigate unintentional insider threat on a national level, these strategies should be incorporated into policy, not just recommended to an organization or company operating within the country. So my policy recommendations. Cybersecurity for developing countries with fledgling programs needs to account for insider threat in the policy creation process. Addressing the causes of UIT with policy or mandated mitigation strategies, tools, and protocols for all organizations in the country will create a program that is much less susceptible to UIT. Policy needs to distinguish between malicious threat and non-malicious threat. So it needs to provide clear, fair, and just legal reinforcements that match both intentional and inadvertent violations of policy. So if the wording of a policy is too vague or the punishment is too severe, the potential for non-compliance goes up. So the severity of the policy, and if the enforcement is too stringent, that creates a distrust of and paranoia towards the government, because the organizations attempting to comply with policy might be penalized for unintentional violation of it. So failing to establish reasonable and just consequences for unintentional compromise of a nation's cyber initiative will create conflict between a nation and its population. Finally, agencies and organizations should be mandated to provide requirements for both corporations and government organizations in terms of organizational training, tool and infrastructure requirements, and routine employee awareness and practical training. Given that this understanding of insider threat is a relatively new concept in cyber and national security, there's not really a precedent for incorporating UIT mitigation strategies in national cybersecurity policies. So in order to address this crucial area of risk, countries with fledgling cybersecurity programs must give the proper weight to UIT in all initial policymaking processes. If it's not incorporated into the foundational cybersecurity policy, it won't be intrinsic, and therefore it'll be less effective than if it was built in from the ground up. The internal threat to a country's cyber initiative is just as important and consequential as any external threat. And policymakers need to consider this to ensure the effectiveness of any cyber program. I welcome any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dabbs. So I'll be asking you about what are the legal ramifications, like in the USA, for an insider revealing or exhuming the information from a public or a private sector company?
The legal ramifications vary depending on the corporation, the department, the branch of government. So I don't have a catch-all answer for you. However, I can say that in tandem with any policies that are executed, there does need to be a legal component and a legal consultation. That is, I know that personally my contact with my legal department is almost hourly. So I would recommend that, again, while I don't have a catch-all answer for what the legal ramifications are, because they vary based pretty much even which region you're in and what type of organization you work for, I would recommend that a policy is created in tandem with a law. So cyber policy in tandem with a cyber law.
All right, got your point. So Mr. Hari, yeah, please proceed.
Is it me?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Haris Khan, you have a question.
Yes, I have one question for Ms. Dabbs. You said 90% of the threats go undetected. So
Yes.
when they do detect those 90%, do they actually assess that these are kind of a benign, let them go, or they have a particular protocol? Okay, within this 90%, we will cherry pick as to which is a bigger threat that we have to deal with.
I'm not quite sure I can answer your question, just because the 90% that go undetected, that is an estimate based on a study that was done given retroactive examination of insider threat risk that was realized after the fact. So in terms of the nature of those incidents, I can't really speak to what we considered high level or low level. What I do know is that a large majority of things that could be considered insider threat, like data egress that might be sensitive, or IP sharing, the systems that detect those things aren't perfect, and the tools that we use, we are constantly tuning. So what I would say is that at the initial start of any insider threat program, you're going to have a lot of false positives. So you're going to have a lot of triggers and a lot of alerts that come up that they don't necessarily need to, but that informs our refinement of the threat model process and gives us a larger net to realize what we're losing.
Thank you.
I have a question now.
Yeah, of course.
Dabbs. Yeah, great discussion, because I was actually going to present on insider threat. It's one of my favorite topics.
I'm so happy you didn't, because I got to.
Yeah,
I would have been shamed.
So I've been working with the government departments and defense for a long time.
Yeah.
So in Australia, they actually implement software to actually monitor some of the activities. And I won't name the softwares, but it is really interesting what you can see, what people are doing, and especially, as you mentioned, like simple things like USBs. So defense is actually banned because it's got different security networks.
Yeah.
especially on the DRN, which is the Defense Restricted Networks and Defense Secure Networks. There's actually no USBs allowed ever. So
We learned our lesson after Snowden, right?
yeah. So I mean, that's one of the key things which the government looks for, and it is pretty obvious to the employees that yes, they are being observed. So is that the same case with US?
I would say, again, NSA completely has banned USBs, for obvious reasons. I'm not sure how uniform the banning is, but I would assume that at least our intelligence organizations and our military branches ban those things. I know that when you go into the NSA, they don't even let you take your phone. So
yeah, that's the same with us.
yeah. And I know that the organization I contract for, we banned USB devices a year ago. So I think that the banning of USB devices in companies that deal with either like large profit and proprietary information and organizations, either government or private, that deal with matters of national security are definitely USB banning. And given that progression, I would assume that it would probably become government-wide in maybe a decade.
Yeah, I mean, we are following the same, and as I mentioned, that Australia collaborates very well with USA on threat intelligence, and it's been there for a while. But I think also, like as you're mentioning, not having any phones, can't take phones inside. Sometimes it's only paper and pencil, depending on where you're going.
All analog.
Yeah, that's right. But thank you so much. It was a great presentation.
Thank you very much. It means a lot coming from you.